Thanks very much. Good afternoon. My name is Kim, and I'm excited to share my findings on survival, mark changes, and capture heterogeneity of bottlenose dolphins in the Shannon Estuary in Ireland with you. Whenever I mention survival, what I'm talking about is annual survival rate, so the proportion of a population still alive after the course of 1 year. In long-lived species with low reproductive rates, adult survival in particular plays an important role for population dynamics, and this is also the case for cetaceans. However, because strandings and the recovery of carcasses are generally rare, survival is typically estimated using mark-recapture techniques. By recording the presence and absence pattern of identifiable individuals over several sampling occasions, so-called encounter histories are created. And because each encounter with a given individual depends on survival of the individual until that moment, as well as successful capture, these two parameters can be estimated using maximum likelihood approaches. And this is exactly what also the Cormack-Jolly-Seber model does. However, in order to obtain valid survival estimates, mark-recapture data has to fulfill a number of assumptions, which can be summarized as correct identification and equal capture probability. And this is not necessarily the case in cetacean datasets, because typically photo identification of natural marks is used to create them, and therefore correct identification depends both on the distinctiveness of marks as well as the quality of images, and also marks can be changed over time. Assumption number 4 is typically met because this type of data collection is non-invasive, so behavior is generally not affected. However, equal availability for capture is not necessarily the case because the individuals can be very mobile and move outside of the study area. And this is exactly what might be happening in the Shannon Estuary bottlenose dolphin population. This population of about 140 dolphins is genetically distinct and regarded resident to the Shannon Estuary in Ireland, which was a major argument to declare this area a special area of conservation back in 2000. However, since 2008, Shannon dolphins have been repeatedly sighted outside of the estuary in Brennan and Tralee Bays. And a failure to account for this exchange could lead to bias and due to unequal capture availabilities. And therefore, the aims of my study were to estimate adult survival rates of this population, while at the same time exploring potential violations of model assumptions due to variation in mark severity or site fidelity. And furthermore, I wanted to assess mark changes in order to investigate the risks of misidentification over time. To do so, my objectives were to use Cormack-Jolly-Seber models and then to include mark severity and site fidelity variation by creating group variables out of them and including them into my models. And then finally, I assessed mark change by calculating mark gain and loss rates for 5 different mark types. Now, the first step for this was to reconstruct as many the encounter histories of as many dolphins as possible. And for this, I had 4 photo identification catalogs available, 3 from the Irish Whale and Dolphin Group and 1 from the National Park and Wildlife Service. The Irish Coastal Bottlenose Dolphin catalog included images taken all around Ireland. Now, per year, I assessed whether an individual had been sighted or not. And then additionally, I looked at survey effort per year by recalling them from logbook entries and then incorporating this also into my models as covariates. I selected the best available image for each individual per year and area, and then categorized them based on 2 properties. The first one being mark distinctiveness, which I categorized from high to low, and then excluded all MQ3 fins because the risk of misidentification is very high. And afterwards, I categorized the remaining images according to image quality, again from high to low. And in order to avoid misidentifications in my final data set, I included high and medium quality images for well-marked individuals, but only high quality images for less well-marked individuals. And by this, I compiled the encounter histories of 141 dolphins and obtained 716 data points for my final data set. Now, to create site fidelity groups, I calculated sighting rates for each dolphin in the Shannon Estuary, in Brandon and Tralee Bays, as well as overall, and then ran an agglomerative hierarchical cluster analysis, which gave me 3 different groups, one with generally few sightings, as you can see here, one with frequent sightings in the Shannon Estuary, and one with frequent sightings in Brandon and Tralee Bays. And now finally, I constructed 3 CJS models, one for overall survival estimation, and then one each with a group effect of either site fidelity or mark severity. I defined appropriate starting models using goodness of fit testing, and afterwards created candidate models by allowing for different definitions of the survival and capture probability parameters. For example, as them being constant or time dependent, and so on. And after running all these model combinations, I selected the best fitting ones using AICC and Akaike weights, and then averaged model estimates in order to account for model selection uncertainty. And then finally, I calculated mark gain and loss rates for these 5 mark types, which are protruding pieces to the trailing edge of the fin, as well as distinct notches and nicks in both the trailing and leading edge of the dorsal fin. And I used the formulas of Auger, Métier, and Whitehead to do so. Now, since I just come from there, I want to start the results section with the results for mark change. So the most prevalent mark types were distinct notches and nicks in the trailing edge of the fin, and they were way more frequent than in the leading edge. And the reason for this is simply that the leading edge of the fin is way thicker, so wounds are more easily inflicted to the trailing edge. The same pattern was also observed by looking at gain rates, which were again highest for trailing edge nicks and notches with 0.29 and 0.26 per dolphin per year, which is very high even for compared to other cetacean species, but not surprising because bottlenose dolphins in particular are known to display aggressive social behaviors. And then finally, for loss rates, I found very low loss rates, and also all cases of loss only refer to mark change beyond recognition of the former mark. So this shows that in general, these mark types are very useful for long-term identification. Now, before I go over to the model results, I briefly want to draw your attention to survey effort, because as you can see, it was highly variable over the years. But even more striking was the unequal distribution across areas. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to the low effort dedicated to Brandon and Tralee Bays. Please keep that in mind for later. Now, looking at the model outcomes, the overall survival model suggested that capture probabilities vary both over time and by trap dependence. And trap dependence in this context essentially indicates capture heterogeneity, which means that the assumption of equal capture was violated by this population. Now, the same pattern for capture probabilities was found in all 3 models. However, in the other 2, a group effect of either mark severity or site fidelity explained capture heterogeneity. Now, looking closer at the mark severity model, we see that highly marked individuals had overall higher capture probabilities than less well marked individuals. And this is not surprising because the image selection criteria that I applied in order to minimize misidentifications also favored the inclusion of more data for better marked individuals. So there's some kind of confounding effect here. And still, this shows that this is significant. For site fidelity, the story is a bit more complex because, as you can see here, individuals of different mark severity were unequally distributed across site fidelity groups. And in particularly, the few sightings group included a high proportion of individuals with few marks only. So this means that here, capture probabilities are likely also confounded due to low identifiability of those individuals. Yet, there were 38 individuals that were highly marked and still had low sighting rates. And my hypothesis is still that this is related to site fidelity variation. Because when compiling the encounter histories, I found that 40 out of 141 Shannon dolphins had been recorded in Brandon and Tralee Bays at least once, and this despite the low effort that had been dedicated to this area. So so this is likely due to site fidelity variation. Also, when comparing Brandon frequent and Shannon frequent, we find that capture probabilities were nearly the same, and also that Brandon frequent individuals had high sighting rates in the Shannon Estuary. And this again shows that there is high connectivity between areas, but even more important, it shows that there's variation between individuals in how they move. So some seem to move between areas while others do not so much. The reasons for this differentiation are not yet clear, but my hypothesis was that this is related to competition or variation in prey preferences, because bottlenose dolphin distribution is known to be driven by prey distribution, and both the Shannon Estuary and Brandon Bay have distinct fisheries. And now finally looking at survival. The overall survival model suggested stable survival at a rate of 0.94, which is actually comparable to survival rates in other bottlenose dolphin populations. So this is, I guess, reassuring. Also for the mark-severity model, I found stable survival rates of comparable values, slightly higher for the better marked individuals, but not significant. What was special here was the presence of a transience effect. And what that essentially means is, in this case, the MQ2 group included a high proportion of individuals with only one overall sighting, which means that these individuals, which are called transients, therefore transience effect, they have an effective survival probability of 0 after their one sighting. So they can negatively bias survival estimates. And in order to cope with that and to exclude these, I fitted an age model, so to explain the age class here. And now finally, for the site fidelity model, I found a negative trend in survival for all three groups, which is striking, of course, given the outcomes of the other two models, but also given the fact that abundance estimates over the past years have never indicated a decline in the population. So rather than showing a true effect, this is kind of the consequence of how the groups were defined, essentially. Because for the few sightings group, all individuals in this group had high uncertainty of fate after their one or few sightings. So this includes a higher risk of mortality the longer the individual hasn't been observed. And therefore, by accumulating these individuals over time, survival is basically biased downwards. Now, for Brandon frequent and Shannon frequent, we see that survival rates were practically 1 for more than half of the study period. And again, this is due to how the groups were defined, because both were characterized by frequent sighting rates. And in order to have frequent sighting rates, individuals have to have survived a certain number of years. So this means that mortality was essentially excluded from these first years and only was allowed towards the end of the study period.
2 minutes.
Thanks. For Shannon frequent, we see that the rates went to a value comparable to the other two models of 0.94, at least as far as we can see here. For Brandon frequent, the decline was steeper, and this is due to what is called a terminal bias. So when individuals leave the study area, the model can, before the end of the study period, that is, the model cannot distinguish between true mortality and this migration. So in this case, it tends to overestimate mortality and therefore underestimate survival. Now, to conclude, survival was stable over the study period and comparable to other bottlenose dolphin populations. Capture heterogeneity was the case and was, in this case, explainable by mark-severity and very likely also site fidelity variation. We saw that effort was unbalanced both over time and between areas, but still frequent sighting rates or high sighting rates of Shannon dolphins in Brandon and Trinity Bays support that there is exchange rather than migration maybe, but exchange between the two areas. And finally, profile changing marks were lost rarely, but gained frequently. And the implications of this for future monitoring surveys are that we will need more consistency in effort, both over time and between areas, in order to achieve a more representative coverage, and that photo ID catalogs should be regularly updated in order to keep track of marked changes and avoid misidentifications in the future. And for this, we will need more cooperation between the organizations involved with studying this population. Thank you very much for your attention.